Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to reintroduce to you now. Nicole Laurent is the most featured returning guest on our show, so be sure to check out all of her episodes on episodes 248, 343, 438, and 538 of Balanced Body Radio. Wow, nice. Nicole has been a licensed mental health counselor in Washington State for almost 2 decades. Her current practice focuses on helping her clients with anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues to transition to a ketogenic diet or uses other nutritional therapies to complement her psychotherapy work. She holds several specialized training certifications, allowing her to work with underlying biological factors in mental illness. Nicole works with clients via telehealth and helps people explore medication free options for their mental health using research and evidence based nutritional and functional psychiatry so that people can get their lives back without side effects or dependence on big pharma. In 2021, she created mentalhealthketo.com, a blog devoted to educating people about ketogenic diets for mental health and neurological issues. You can find her on that website at www.mentalhealthketo.com or on social media on Instagram at mentalhealthketo or on Twitter at Keto Counselor. Nicole Laurent, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you back to Boundless Body Radio.
Thank you for having me. I always enjoy coming here.
I enjoy our chats quite a bit. I realized in the introduction, I gave you a lot of credit for appearing on the show 5 times. Normally, your cats appear with you. I should probably give them more credit for making as many appearances as you have as well.
Yes, she just moved. She doesn't like when I start to talk and get exuberant, so she's off taking a nap now. But Miss Whiskers is in the house. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, we both share quite the love for felines. I love my cats. They're awesome. Just the best. And I had an amazing experience this year when I got to meet you in person in San Diego at the Symposium for Metabolic Health. I can't believe it's been basically like 3 months since we were there and home and back to work and all that stuff. And I do feel like I'm still kind of buzzing from that conference. And I really appreciated the fact that I got to see you, got to meet you and chat in person and all that stuff. I've been asking everybody since the conference, so I don't want to make an exception for you. What were some of your standout moments as you're reflecting on that conference this time? What were some of the more special things that you really appreciated?
Oh, it was a great conference. That was actually the first time that I have ever been to a low carb USA conference, believe it or not. I've been to lots of different ones, but not that one. And I was honored to be a speaker there. That was great. Um, I don't know. I like the amount of science that is kind of put together with just practical considerations about doing low carb. And I love that there was so many different um, types of talks about different kinds of conditions. So I think that, as always, I love Georgia's talks, although I've heard many of them repeatedly. But I really liked Drew. Drew is a researcher who is coming out of Volek's lab, and they did a study on depression in college students and the use of a ketogenic diet. Now, the college students didn't have any formal diagnoses of a mental illness or anything, but they were looking at depressive symptoms. And I just thought that was a great talk because Drew was talking about how these college kids did it. They did it, they did a ketogenic diet in college during a time of life where we would just expect, oh, there's no way that those kids that age, or those adults that age could do that, right? And they did it in spite of dining halls, and they got it done. And we know that they were compliant because they made ketones, right? So, so yeah, I thought that was my favorite talk, I think.
I love that. That's fantastic. I don't know if I told you this, but my plane broke on the way from Salt Lake City to San Diego. So we had a big delay, and they offered passengers like $700 vouchers if they would have taken delayed flight. And I did not accept because I knew I would have to miss Georgia and Drew's presentation, but I believe you were number 3 and I really didn't want to miss yours. So I gave
Oh,
up a $700 voucher to be there for your talk. I don't know if
oh
I
my
told you that.
goodness. Oh my goodness. That's
I
wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
excited to hear you and your presentation. You did a wonderful job. It's really interesting to me. Like you had already introduced me to Lauren Kennedy West, who we've interviewed on the show. Thanks to you, she's really had a great time kind of stepping back from medications with her schizoaffective disorder. And what an inspiring story. But I go to these conferences and I think that all of you who work in this space are all working together all the time, or I've heard of everybody in this space. And you get this sense of like Dr. Lori Calabresi, I believe is how you say her name. I didn't know who she was. She's got
She's
this whole
amazing.
program that she's running
Yeah.
on her own, like going on walks and doing book clubs. And she made a wonderful presentation. Guido Frank, I have never heard of this guy, and he presents amazing information about anorexia. And we just hear from people who work in your space how important it is to get together because, again, it's a lot more siloed than I think somebody would assume. It's not like you guys are always getting together and talking about this stuff all the time.
Yeah, no. So I have to say, and I don't know what it's like in other kind of low carb, kind of ketogenic professional communities and spaces. I've only had the privilege to kind of branch out and work with the metabolic psychiatry kind of peeps, as I call them. But they are amazing, and we're constantly collaborating. We're constantly kind of, making up projects together to move the science forward and to move clinical practice forward. And I'm sure it's like this in other communities that are focused on particular diagnoses or areas of illness, but we're just all so really focused on getting this pushed through as a treatment option for people. Like, we are literally bananas excited every single time we come together, and we're just, because we're seeing people get better, that we've got just brilliant. So I just want your listeners to know, if any of them are suffering with mental illness or have a family member that is suffering from mental illness, I want you to understand that these people in this space are wildly driven and passionate and are constantly working tirelessly for you to make sure that this becomes a more accessible treatment, and not just like accessible at all costs. Like, they are really doing just the highest level research studies and science and putting it together. And how do we get better clinical outcomes? And how do we do this RCT so it is unassailable, right? The outcomes. And how do we support these people coming out of trials? And how do we put treatment teams together? Like, they are all over it, like you wouldn't believe. And it's just nonstop in this space. Like, can't stop, won't stop. Isn't that like a hashtag or something? Like, that's what it's like. So I'm just really proud and excited, and there's every reason for everyone listening to this to have lots of hope about what's coming down the pipeline for everyone.
Absolutely love that. I'm thinking back on the first time we chatted about this, and I've always just loved your passion. I've always on this podcast tried to wind you up about something and get you talking super passionately either about ketones or the work you do, because it's so infectious and I love it. But thinking back on the first conversation, we could have said those exact same things and like, yeah, we're working on the studies, we're trying to get the RCTs, and thinking of the practicality of some of that stuff, even just a few years ago, was kind of a challenge. And there really wasn't a lot of like funding in this kind of thing. And like thinking how any of that stuff would have gone down would have been kind of tough. And in that time, we see the rise of the Bazuki family and their son, Matt, and they create a foundation. There's this all of a sudden infusion of money directed towards this. You never know when you start something, you start a work and you just put your head down and you keep going, what things will manifest themselves to you and open up new possibilities that I would have never foreseen a few years ago.
Yeah, we're so grateful. I mean, it's not just the Bazookies that are funding these studies, although I'm sure that is the primary piece. Like, for example, Deanna Kelly had that Maryland study that was partially government funded, I believe. And so we're seeing, I mean, it got canceled, but that wasn't because of the funding. It was because of the Maryland public health person. And don't get me going on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that there are multiple funding opportunities that are starting to kind of show up. And every time I see a talk given at a more conservative type of conference, the researchers, like, for example, ISBD, the International Society for Bipolar Disorder, I went this year in Iceland, and I went the year before. And when Georgia Eid and Ian Campbell and Shivani Sethi gave some of their talks, you could see the researchers coming up just really interested. All these people, they really do want to see recovery. They really do want to see better patient outcomes. They really are tired of watching people suffer, and so when that kind of data drops, they really are interested. So who knew that this space was just kind of going to blow up so quickly? Like, I kind of feel like I knew, and maybe I said this out loud. Hopefully I did. I want credit, right? Because it's like, people are going to see other people recover, and people are going to see other people get well, and they're going to want a piece of that. They're not going to be able to put this, back in the box. This is going to be a momentum building event for people. So yeah. So
Wonderful.
thank goodness for the Bazookies, though, because the support with that. And then also, there's some different foundations that are kind of starting to kind of pop up. So, and I think I can say this. So Keto Mojo, for example, announced several years ago, actually, on a interview with Doug Reynolds, I believe, a low carb podcast, that they were creating a foundation to kind of help, and what they were going to do with that. I don't think it was clear back then, but that's starting to take shape. And so that might actually also be an additional support for different types of activities within this space and others for ketogenic diets. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's so amazing. It's so cool to consider the potential for the future. You mentioned this is your very first, Low Carb USA event. You mentioned Doug Reynolds. What a wonderful job he does at the microphone to keep people from asking dialogues for their questions.
Yeah.
He is very tough. And it's so cool to see, the people that show up to ask the questions. Like, again, Dr. Lori Calabresi asked several questions. Dave Feldman is asking genuine and honest questions. Dr. Tony Hampton, Dr. Brian Lenskis, like all these guys are asking questions, but it's intermixed with lay people. Were you pretty impressed with some of the questions and the knowledge base that you heard from people that are not necessarily experts in the field? They haven't studied this. They're just kind of lay people. And did you also get a lot of value of not just mingling with people that are doing the practice like you are, but also mingling with the day-to-day kind of people who made their way to the conference to learn more?
Yeah, that's what I noticed about this conference that was a little bit different than the usual conferences that I go to, was that there was really a large public component to this conference. It wasn't just a bunch of doctors and therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists hanging out. It wasn't like there for only medical education or CEUs types of thing. It was really a great mix of that. And it was cool because I would see like people in the publics, having real conversations with doctors and other really well-educated individuals in the ketogenic space. And so I think it's a kind of a special conference that way. And I would say the lay public at Low Carb USA is quite advanced in terms of understanding metabolic health and the effects that has on different conditions.
Yeah. Well said. That's awesome. And then the last conference question I have for you, you mentioned going to other conferences. It sounds like the reception is pretty positive from the world of people that are in this space, but aren't as familiar with metabolic therapies for mental health. Has it been, from what you can tell, well received? Has it been mostly ignored, or is it really like on the rise?
I feel like it's inevitable in terms of on the rise. So I went, where did I go this year? I went to Keto Live Switzerland, and our friends over in Europe have a little bit of a harder time. Things aren't blowing up quite in the same way over there as they are here. So they have a little bit more resistance than what we have going on here, at least with metabolic psychiatry for sure. So my talk there was the same type of talk I gave at Low Carb USA about how to build treatment teams. And that's really exciting because that conversation has kind of led to several people reaching out to me and wanting mentorship or consultation about how to expand out their low carb practice in such a way that it's appropriate for ketogenic therapies for mental illness, right? So that's very exciting. And then also Louisette at the Ketogenic Institute in the Netherlands is I'm working with her and another psychologist to create a metabolic psychiatry type of program for health coaches over there so that that population can get access to this potential option. And, you know, each country is different. Like, how do you maneuver the structure as it is and the culture and what's in place and what isn't? And so that was a big job that Louisette took on. So you should have Louisette on here. Have you had her on here?
No, I haven't. I'd love
Oh
to.
my goodness. I'll connect you. Louisette has a wonderful podcast over there herself, but she's a great podcast guest also. So we'll connect you for sure.
Excellent.
Yeah. So, you know, and then so yes and no. So the International Society for Bipolar Disorder, like I said, a couple of years ago was very exciting because Shabani and Ian and Georgia did talks and researchers came up and was really asking questions. This year was also cool because one, Keto Mojo had a booth at a conventional bipolar disorder conference full of psychiatrists. Cool. Yes.
Wow.
And
cool.
some of them came up and were very interested. And I just happened to be hanging out with the Keto Mojo people because they're like my favorite booth and when some of my friends, you know. So I happened to be there and I was able to answer some clinical questions about it. So I thought that was really good. And there was some researchers that were really kind of interested and curious. You know, and it was good. It was interesting. It didn't have as much traffic as we were hoping, but I think its presence there was really important and good.
It's huge.
And then there was a lot of posters about mitochondria at the International Society for Bipolar Disorder and metabolism. And so you could just see walking through the posters how the stage is set for the adoption and the understanding of the research that's going to come out or that is coming out. I had my poster, my little case study poster for bipolar disorder, and there was a few people that came up and asked questions about that. So that's published in the peer-reviewed literature in Frontiers in Nutrition. And then, you know, but that said, there was also a situation. Well, it wasn't really a situation. That makes it sound, you know, complicated. Situation. It wasn't a situation. It was a talk. It was a lived experience talk by a woman who had bipolar disorder. And at the end of the talk, I came up and I asked the question on the microphone. I said, if you had access to a ketogenic diet as a potential treatment in your worst times, do you think you would have taken advantage of it or you would have tried it? And she said, yes, I was so desperate. I absolutely would have. And then she also expressed some concerns that it would be very difficult to implement, you know, the usual things. And then it was really interesting because the doctor that was on stage with her, how do I say this? He made it sound like there was not an evidence base for this as a treatment for brain disorders. Like it was very clear he did not understand or had gone through the literature that it was used for epilepsy for 100 years. And I'm not even sure he was up to date on the ketogenic literature in general. So he kind of made it sound like we were going to potentially take advantage of these poor people who were desperate for treatment, right? So it was a little bit, I was like, whoa, my, you know, so it was just very odd, but understandable because it's new for this purpose. And I totally get, I understand the want that scientists have for RCTs. I totally get it. That said, I'm going to go off on a tangent, so I hope that's okay. That said, I think it is an ethical issue to watch patients suffer with inadequate treatments for things like bipolar depression, waiting for an RCT. The medications that you are using to help treat depression and bipolar disorder are quite inadequate. Ask anyone with bipolar disorder. They are struggling and they are trying not to fall into the pit, right? And so why wouldn't, I mean, it's not like there's a complete lack of evidence base in the use of the ketogenic diet for neurological issues. And now there isn't a complete lack of evidence specifically in its use for bipolar depression and bipolar disorder. And, there's case studies and there's pilot trials. We have the stuff coming out of Edinburgh. We have Shabani Sethi's and co-author studies. Like, there's some evidence base for this. So are you really going to put someone's life at risk? Because the suicidality in this population is quite high. Are you really going to hope that, let this person suffer for the next 5 to 7 years while we get all those RCTs done until you've dotted your I's and crossed your T's? Are you really going to ethically take the risk that that person is going to kill themselves? With the suicide rates that we have for bipolar disorder, I do not understand how that is an ethical stance for a practitioner. When you have actual patients, mothers, wives, husbands, daughter, you have actually human beings suffering immensely, and you're going to withhold access to this information to them until you have your perfect RCT? Where is the medical ethics in that? And how is that even defendable? So that's what went through my body and my mind as that particular doctor was saying that. And that, we're on our way. And so I'm not worried about it in terms of the medical establishment eventually offering this. And I'm not worried about this in terms of pretty soon, I think everybody with mental illness is going to understand that this is a real viable option, and they just may or may not get it at their doctor's office, but they can pursue it themselves. So I'm not worried about it from that standpoint. But I am really kind of concerned about the lack of ethical conversation around this nuanced topic.
Those are exactly the sound bites we invite you on the show to get from you, getting you a little fired up about that. I'm thinking about, not only Lauren Kennedy West, again, we mentioned her, but also you introduced me to Sam and June. I hope I got their names right, where he dealt with bipolar for over 2 decades and also needed to lose some weight. And so they decided to look up what would be a good weight loss diet. They came across low carb keto, and all of a sudden his mental health is getting better. And they're like, well, what's this all about? And they almost got like backed in to discovering some of this stuff and finding you and reading Dr. Chris Palmer and brain energy and all these things, and asking them about, like, why don't you think this is talked about more? Why did you guys have to find this as a weight loss diet? And then do the research later on to say, like, oh, this has actually been shown many times to help with this. And I love their response. They like quite angry in the beginning that they were never told about this, because it's changed their lives. And they are the sweetest, nicest people who agreed to be on a podcast. They've never been on a podcast. They were awesome guests, incredibly kind and amazing. And like, when it gets down to that individual level, I can totally understand why you get so upset that more people don't know about this. Also, it's great that it's starting to get out there more. Both of those things can be true.
Yes, both are absolutely true. Yeah. Yeah, they're lovely. I really enjoy them. Yeah.
They're great. They're great. Okay, well, I did want to talk to you a little bit about some of the projects that you had going on this year. You're always so busy and have so many different, studies going on or papers or things you're working on. So maybe in the last year and a half that we've had you on, can we talk about some of the things that you've been working on, things that you've been interested in?
Yeah, I've been I've been really busy. So Lauren's channel is very popular and she always mentions me, and so people find me. And so I've gotten to work with just so many wonderful individuals that have kind of found this potential treatment option through her channel. So that's really exciting. So doing lots of individual consultation, but there's only one of me, and I have other things I want to do to kind of move the space forward. So I also have an online program. It's called the Brain Fog Recovery Program. But it is really the exact same thing that I did with Lauren and that I do with people all the time, but in an online version. And that is it's called the Brain Fog Recovery Program because I created it several years ago before metabolic psychiatry was so accepted. and people were not ready for me to call it what it was used for, which is it educates people on how to use neurologically appropriate ketogenic diets as a potential treatment, or co-treatment for mental illness or neurological disorders. But that's a really long name. And every time I would go in a Reddit group and say, hey, this might help you, people would get really angry. And so I was like, okay, it's brain fog, it's mood issues, it's cognitive issues. That's the umbrella. But it's a really great program. And I think it's kind of superior to individual consultation, because you get people in these live Q&As that all have these similar goals, and they just are really lovely, and they support each other, and they laugh, and everybody works really well together. It's got that social component. Just like you mentioned, Lori Calabrese, her program, I think, it's an in-person program, but it has that social component. And I think that that can really be helpful for a lot of people. So don't just assume individual consultation with me is the best. Like, I think the program is the best, actually. And so I've been doing a lot of work that way, a lot of clinical work. And outside of Washington State, it's not considered clinical work, it's private consultation. So just to be clear with people. And then I've been excited about research. For some reason, I have just kind of branched off into more research. So I have a writing group that I meet with on Fridays, and we work on publishing case studies. And we literally have more case studies than we can write out fast enough in terms of recovery. And we're very clear about the data that we collect. So we're collecting mood assessments, we're collecting qualitative data, we're trying to write up really good quality informational case studies that other clinicians can use to help inform their practice, possibly with these populations. And we're trying to publish case studies in which we're looking at specific diagnoses. And there's been a lot of really great case studies that have been published this year. Like Calabrese has a beautiful, well, you saw in the Low Carb USA, she was talking about this beautiful, beautiful case series she did of very complicated comorbid anxiety and depression cases that just recovered, full remission. Like, why isn't this on the news, right? And I mean, didn't even take that long. It's just a few weeks, guys. So it's really exciting. So I've been excited about that, working on case studies and getting those published, or getting them in peer review to determine if they will be published. And then that same working group published this year a clinical psychology, so ketogenic diets and clinical psychology paper talking about the role of psychologists and psychotherapists in this space. It was a giving them a heads up that it exists, talking about it was educational, really, and then a discussion about where their roles could be and how important they are in helping support people using the ketogenic diet and other not metabolic psychiatry, other ones. It was small, it was narrow. I was just trying to give them a little introduction to the field, right? And what their role might be. But we talked about different ratios a little bit. We talked about what ketogenic diets were, its history. So that was published, and that's actually had a very good altmetrics score. People are really interested in that and reading that. So that's super exciting. That was in Frontiers in Psychology. So we got that published. And then I've been working on a scoping review of the use of, which is different than a systematic review. So we're mapping the literature. We're looking at the literature very carefully, and we're saying, has there been ketogenic diets used with different psychiatric diagnoses, specifically those considered mental illness in the DSM-5, in psychiatric rehabilitation settings? Now, that last part is a little weird, and that's part of my brain and how I think it is. I think that there is a misconception that ketogenic diets for mental illness is something that is only really happening in research settings only. And I wanted to look at, is that true? Are ketogenic diets, granted, some diagnoses are going to be using ketogenic diets more so than others, but maybe not. We don't know from there. So we're scoping their research. And I think the psychiatric rehabilitation setting piece is really important. So we've got the Denon study, which was at an inpatient hospital in France. We've got a Sethi's et al. Study with bipolar disorder or ketogenic diets for bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. So that's at a clinic. So there's these clinical settings. While a study is being done, it's still being implemented in clinical settings in which psychiatric rehabilitation is the focus, right? This is not just something that's being done in labs. This is literally happening. And then there's a case study literature as well showing that this is already being done in settings in which psychiatric rehabilitation or recovery or treatment is the focus. And so we're doing a scoping review for that. So that's really a lot of work. I'm not sure why I signed up for that. I'm a little bit wondering, a little nervous, but it's big and it's scoping, and it's going to be really helpful in mapping the literature, not just the psychiatric assessments that are being used in the research literature, but also some of the metabolic markers that are being used by researchers and clinicians in using this as a treatment. So my hope is that that will be very helpful to people in some aspect, and policymakers too. Policymakers read scoping reviews from what I understand, and they use them in order to kind of help them make decisions. And other researchers read scoping reviews because they're very helpful in identifying gaps in the research literature that still need to be looked at. And then I have my beautiful recovery study that I'm so in love with my recovery study. And so I've got that going on. That is, my goal is 50 interviews from individuals who identify as recovered or recovering through the use of a ketogenic diet, and their family members who observed that recovery. And so that has been wonderful. And I have 21 of those interviews already done, and I'm coding. And these stories are so powerful. Like, I'm like, your coding is this qualitative thing where you look at the data, which is the words, and you code. And right now I'm in the first phase of coding, and it's, you're just kind of using the quotes as codes, and then it's a whole thing. But man, I got tears in my eyes. Like, and I know these, some of them I've worked with in the past, and they've come back for the recovery study, and many of them I haven't, but I know these stories because I collected them and I, did the transcriptions. But then when I'm sitting there coding, like, these are really powerful, powerful stories. So my research question is not very fancy. It's like, what is going on here? What are we seeing with these recoveries that are happening on ketogenic diets? Because they are so much more than just symptom control. There's so much more going on here than just symptom control. And while a qualitative study cannot infer causation, I can still possibly, if the data allows me and my analysis is good, I can still possibly identify processes involved in that rehabilitation or that recovery for people. So yeah, all this takes a lot of time. That's why if someone contacts me, please consider my online program instead of individual consultation, because I just really need the extra time to move these other things forward that I'm hoping will help the field move along in my very small contribution way.
That's it though. That just those 87 things you're working on. That's it.
I think there's more, but I don't know if I can.
I'm like trying to take notes and like scrambling, and like my wrist is starting to cramp up. You're working on so many things. That's amazing. I want to talk to you about a few of the things that you mentioned. We can deep dive a little bit more into them. I do want to bring this up again. We did an entire episode, one of my all-time favorites, episode 343, I believe. Yep, 343, where we talked about brain fog. And I don't want to let this slip. Again, we did a whole episode about it. But when most people hear brain fog, they wouldn't necessarily be thinking they need a psychiatrist, right? Brain fog, I look around me and lots of people have brain fog. And I'm getting into my 30s and my 40s and my 50s. And yeah, it's just normal to forget stuff. Or you forget where you parked or, just little things like that. We talked about this before, but again, why is it so important to identify mental issues starting with things that seem potentially benign or again, not normal, but maybe average, like brain fog?
Because they're your warning system. They're the warning lights on your car, right? You don't plan a long road trip when the emergency lights are going on in your car, or the hazard lights are going off in your car. You need to pay attention to those. So even in people in their early 30s, we see areas of brain hypometabolism already occurring, which we can't infer causation, but it is reasonable to suspect that people are getting insulin resistance in their brain, and they're starting to develop areas of the brain that don't use glucose well for fuel. And so, you got to pay attention to that. If you're trying to fuel your brain with the wrong fuel, or a fuel that your brain is not able to utilize, that causes a cascade effect. A starving brain is not, it's not a chill brain. Right? So there's times of hyperexcitability and hypoexcitability where it's not functioning well, and the hyperexcitability looks like neurotransmitter imbalances and neuroinflammation and a brain that's just struggling to do basic housekeeping. And that has ramifications. So it's just so important. And I wish we wouldn't normalize it. And I always get a little upset when I'm like on a Facebook group or something and someone's giggling about their menopause brain, or someone's giggling about their ADHD symptoms, or someone, and I get it when your brain isn't working well and you can't figure out why. I mean, I have a history where I had really bad cognitive impairment, and all I could do was laugh. Like, I just made up a funny word because I couldn't access the word, right? And you just and I forgot what I had for dinner, and I forgot that thing, and that's like, it's a coping mechanism. So when I see people like giggling about it, I know what's going on. They're coping. They don't know how to fix it, and they are just making the best of it. But that's really not the best policy. There really are things we can do. Like, a lot of people who identify as having ADHD, you know, that can be that might be a neurological difference. That could be it. It could also be you just don't have the basic micronutrients you need to make your neurotransmitters, right? You have a choline deficiency. Maybe you can't make acetylcholine, and maybe you don't have basic levels of vitamin D that you need. Like, it can be a nutrient insufficiency. It can be a macronutrient deficiency. If they're not getting decent amounts of protein, that's got to be broken down into amino acids to make your neurotransmitters. Like, there's things we can do. So when I talk about brain fog, I think about mood symptoms and cognitive symptoms. Brain fog is an umbrella term, kind of a general population umbrella term. But I want to make it really clear that there can be really significant neurological impairments going on under that kind of general populist term that we can do things for.
Okay, so you kind of separated those into two different columns. What would be some of the mood symptoms that you would notice that come along with brain fog?
Well, when people talk about brain fog, they kind of talk about like, um, well, I can't think, or I can't focus, or I forget words, or I can't make it back from the grocery store, right? Or I really need that GPS system. Like, they really think about it as cognitive symptoms. But if you've got a brain that's not working well, because of energy issues or micronutrient insufficiencies or just general nutrition issues, they a frontal lobe that works is required for emotion regulation. Like, in order, to perceive your world in a way that stories it so that it doesn't cause a mood disturbance, you have to have a fully functioning frontal lobe. It's why people with TBIs traumatic brain injury, they often have really significant mood issues. You need a frontal lobe to regulate your emotions. And so a lot of people who have cognitive symptoms, I think they have like low mood and a lot of anxiety, and they don't think about that as part of their brain fog symptoms. But neurological function includes both cognitive symptoms and mood symptoms, but we don't generally think about it that way.
I don't think I've ever thought about it that way. So I like how you separated them out. Maybe it was an overly obvious question, but I like thinking about it in the way that you explained it. So yeah, I really do appreciate that. So for the person who is listening to all this and listening to all your work, and you are amazing at collecting these case studies, and your whole presentation, at the symposium was a case study. It's one person. For the people that we described earlier, like you said, they're sitting around, they're waiting for the randomized controlled trials. What is the value of all of these case studies being done?
So the value of the case studies being done. So many of your listeners probably remember seeing somewhere in their education, or maybe on a video or something, a pyramid of evidence, right? And in that pyramid of evidence, probably level 2, I think it is, or level 3, there are case studies. And so multiple case studies fill out that bottom part of the pyramid, the research pyramid of evidence, the pyramid of evidence that we use to determine what the power of the scientific evidence is for any particular topic. So RCTs are at the very tippy top, right? They're at the very tippy top of the pyramid, but there's this whole other base that builds to get to the tippy top of the pyramid, which is RCTs. And RCTs are one type of knowing. RCTs are one type of evidence. There are other ways of knowing, right? Talk to anybody who has recovered from serious mental illness using a ketogenic diet, and they will tell you they don't care about your RCTs, that they know. And the people who watch them recover know. There's other ways of knowing. So I've always thought that was kind of an odd thing. But RCTs are considered the gold standard in the medical field, right? But case studies matter. And I'm not under any delusions that my case studies or publishing of case studies are somehow a huge scientific boon to the field, because case studies are just very limited in terms of how far we can generalize those results, right? In fact, it's not good scientific thinking to generalize those results outside of the case study. And when we write up our results and our discussion, we're always very careful to talk about what the limitations are of the case study, or the case series even. So, a case series can have 3 case studies. So there's that piece. The reason I feel really passionate about, and my writing group feels really passionate about this, is those case studies, families find those published case studies. When families are searching for hope and searching for alternative treatment options to medications, or trying to figure things out, they do end up on Google Scholar, and they do end up finding those case studies. And when someone can identify with the situation of someone in a case study, it helps them imagine possibilities for themselves. Sometimes it gives them hope where they had not dared to hope again, that they could improve their symptoms or feel a little bit better. And so that's the benefit that I see in publishing case studies. But there is a research benefit in that it helps fill out that research base of the pyramid.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's really, really important to say. I think it was Dr. Peter Bruckner in not the 2024, but I think the 2023 Symposium of Metabolic Health. We got on stage and he said, "What's the top level of evidence that we have today?" And you heard, rumbles in the audience. Everybody saying, "Oh, randomized control trials and blah blah blah." We all know, but he was like, "No, it's an N of one. When you are the N of one, when it's you and your life and your person." it matters the most. You don't care about RCTs. You care about feeling better, whatever it is. And I think of the individuals, Lauren and Sam, and all these people that you know, that again, you're collecting information on them. Yet even hearing their stories again and doing the work on them brings you to tears. Like that is really, really important work. Again, that I hope people won't just hear case studies and be like, oh, that's a really low level of evidence. We don't need to pay attention to that, you know?
Yeah. So just so people understand, I have no worries that I'm going to easily collect 50 interviews. Like there are so many people recovering. My study, it's an IRB approved study, and I'm only allowed to collect interviews in the United States. And so that's very limited. And then I have some pre-eligibility data that makes it really difficult for people to meet that criteria, right? And it's basically mood assessment. So they have to show on some kind of standardized mood assessment. And many people with mental illness have gone and seen psychologists and psychotherapists and psychiatrists, and they give them these mood assessments, right? That are relevant to their particular diagnosis. So an OCD diagnosed person might get something around obsessive and compulsive thoughts. Someone with depression might get a PHQ-9, for example. And so before I even collect that interview, they have to show at least a 50% reduction in symptoms as measured by one of those standardized assessments. And even with that high bar, right? Because some people are like, I don't remember if I took an assessment, or I don't know how to get in touch with that psychiatrist to get that assessment. I'm not having any problems. I'm not having any problems finding people to do my study. And yes, some of those interviews are family members, and they don't have that pre-eligibility criteria where they have to whip out an assessment in order to participate. But a lot of the 21 interviews that I have already collected are of actual patients who have recovered and have no problem giving me that, and are super proud of their baseline assessments to kind of show, look, it's 0, right? Look where it was. Look at it now. This took 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or even, I'm 70% of the way there. I don't feel fully recovered, but I'm definitely on my way. I feel like this is really helping me. So imagine that, guys. That's just me. That's just me with this very quiet study that's not being advertised really in any big way, and I'm having no problem finding people. So don't think it's just like this 1 or 2 random case studies in the research literature. This is happening in clinicians' offices all over the world. And it's not that I'm magical, although I swear Lauren's audience think I am the thing that made it better. Like, there's tons of me's, there's tons of Nicole's doing this work and doing it well, and people are getting better. So it's not the clinician. It's not that this is this magical just one-off. Like, people are getting better. This is not hard to find people getting better. And so at what point is how many case studies does it take before you accidentally have a randomized sample to some degree, right?
Good
I
point.
mean, there is some randomization in just huge numbers of individual case studies. They don't all have the same backgrounds. They don't all have the same clinicians. They don't all have the same diagnoses. That, many of them have comorbid, complicated diagnoses. They're not on all the same medications. They're not on all the same exact formulation of a ketogenic diet. There is built-in randomization in the sheer number of individuals recovering using ketogenic diets for mental illness. So please don't get hung up on RCTs, people. Don't wait around waiting for the perfect RCT. And for goodness sakes, don't wait around waiting for your psychiatrist or your general practitioner to catch up to the research literature and get on board. Don't do a ketogenic diet without help, and don't do a ketogenic diet without a prescriber. That is no joke. It is dangerous. But also, don't wait around waiting for daddy to give you permission to get well.
Love it. I absolutely love it. Wow, I think it's so powerful. Some of the case studies we reviewed in San Diego when it was related to anorexia, which I actually just learned this week. I haven't verified this, but it came from Dr. Tro on the Low Carb MD podcast that in certain either states or countries where human euthanasia is
Oh,
permitted, anorexia can now qualify for that. So a doctor, again, where this is, the specifics of it, I'm not exactly sure, but having severe anorexia can then qualify you to do a doctor-assisted suicide. That can, I mean, that just tells you how terrible that disease is. And it's not just that the ketogenic diet helps obese people lose weight; it helps anorexic people gain weight. But those clinical assessments that you see is what really stands out. Like they are clearly improving over the course of 3 months or 6 months. They feel better about themselves. They're happier. That they have less worries about food. Yet again, we're told that, oh, it's just another restrictive diet. This is the worst thing you can do for somebody with an eating disorder. I mean, you've done tons of work with eating disorders and binge eating and that kind of thing. And it's amazing how, yes, it can help you weight stabilize, but it's a subjective score, but like it's objectively showing that somebody is feeling way, way, way better if they stay with the treatment.
yeah. So I've, right now the general, oh, there's not like we get a lot of practice guidelines, but so for example, for Guido's study, he's only working with weight restored anorexia because, we want to make sure that there isn't a loss of weight. And I think it takes a very educated and experienced clinician working with anorexia to make sure that there isn't weight loss, and to, we want to make sure some of those eating behaviors are a little bit um under control, right? uh so yeah, so they do beautifully. The people that I've worked with that are weight restored anorexia, but still have really problematic kind of obsessions and thoughts and feelings around food and eating and body image, they're really quite, that are quite tortured. They can be weight restored, but they still very much suffer from the symptoms of their diagnosis. And so I see beautiful recoveries with that. And it just really makes me wonder, at what point are we going to have larger kind of treatment facilities that use this um as a potential treatment. And I'm not talking about necessarily the non-weight restored, but I also think we can, and Michelle Hearn talks about this beautifully. I also think we could offer them more nutritious foods that don't, perpetuate their mental illness through nutritional deficiencies and that sort of thing. So I'm just waiting for some brilliant Michelle Hearn type hint individual to create a beautiful treatment center for anorexia that is comprehensive and gives these people a place to go where they, maybe a combo. I know Ellen Horn has their inpatient treatment program, right? But maybe there needs to be one specifically for weight restored anorexia, where it's a you teach them how to cook and all this beautiful treatment that happens. So I just have my fingers crossed. I know that's coming. I know
Yeah,
that's coming because
perfect.
I have parents. I literally have parents who reach out to me asking for this, asking for some kind of treatment program for anorexia that is ketogenic diet based, because they've read the case studies too.
Mm.
So for someone who is ready, willing, and able to make that happen, let's go. Let's do it.
Michelle Hearn,
I know.
she heard us.
Michelle Hearn.
I'm texting you right after this. Yeah, that's wonderful. Another thing I wanted to ask you about is something that kind of like logically makes a little bit of sense, which is when you're giving nutrition recommendations that can be quite strict when we're talking about mental health. We want a fairly strict version of a ketogenic diet to really help with somebody. You are working with somebody who doesn't already have a lot of mental capacity. Now you're asking them to do this task. It's going to be incredibly challenging. It might not even be worth it because it's so much more work. I hear that. I hear that from people in our space who promote this from time to time, that it's just really, really challenging. And then I interview people like Lauren and Sam and June, And they say things like, well, yeah, it was like a week of like we couldn't have, bread anymore, and we cut out soda, and that wasn't, but in the beginning it was, a little hard, but over time we don't even want those foods anyway. They take a bite of a piece of cake and they say it tastes disgusting, and they have nausea for 3 days afterwards or whatever. So when I hear people say that doing this diet is really, really challenging, what I see on the ground, what I observe with people that do it, it doesn't look that difficult at all. What have been some of your experiences as far as like compliance on this kind of diet?
Yeah, so the people that come to see me are miserable and highly motivated, and depending on their support network. So um I've had people who are in really bad places that don't have a support network be able to do it. And what does that look like? It looks like, okay, we're going to get ready. We're going to get you into ketosis. You're going to go buy 4 pounds of ground beef. You're going to cook it up. You're going to make this mayonnaise sauce that's going to make, we'll put some herbs in it. It'll be good, some garlic. And we're going to we're going to measure them out, right? This much protein, this much mayonnaise, and you're depressed, and I get that. And you can eat this cold if you want, right out of the fridge. And you won't necessarily have the same brain in a week or two. Once you start to make ketones, your energy might get better. You might find this to be easier. But if not, on such and such a day, I know this sounds really weird, but I've literally used the session where they have me on their phone and they take me in the kitchen and they cook the beef and we talk while they cook the beef and get that Primal Kitchen's avocado oil mayonnaise out. Okay, now we're going to put some garlic salt in that. Just really dirt simple. This does not have to be Maria Emmerich beautiful cookbooks with 27 ingredient meals to get you into ketosis. It can be simple. And so, they've got factor meals too. Like I've had really depressed individuals just kind of order factor meals for the first 2 weeks to just kind of get their head around what does a ketogenic like meal look like, right? And not everybody has to be on super high ratios. I rarely have to put anyone above a 2-to-1 ratio, which is not
Mm.
that bad. Like Dom D'Agostino told me he eats at a 1-to-1 to a 1.5-to-1 ratio. And a lot of my people like Lauren, when we first started her out, she was only at a 1.5-to-1 ratio and she made great ketones. And some people need higher and some people need lower carbs. You just got to work with a professional that can help you like move things around. But you're going to have a different brain in a month. You're going to have a totally different brain in 3 months. If you're a responder to this, it's going to be so worth it. And there is a learning curve. And, I'm pretty hardcore. I make my people track on Chronometer. I'm like, you're going to learn to track because you don't actually know how many carbs is in things until you start to track. It's a skill. But sometimes when they're in bad shape, I'm like, eat off this food list. We're going to start here. Right. And that's where we
Yep.
start. And, yeah, it's nothing is as hard as the mental health symptoms that you are living with and that you have gotten used to living with. I promise you, a ketogenic diet is easier than what you are already going through.
Yep. I love that point. That's amazing. Visually, I think that's really helpful for people to see. And I'm so glad I can say this now because it's been a few years that I couldn't say this, but we got such great results with this for so long. Diet Doctor has now been reverted back to ketogenic low carb nutrition. Their meal
Mhm.
planner, their meal plans, their recipes are all lovely that you can just go and check out and just look at some of the pictures. And I've told people in the past, just make something that looks like that. Eat it until you're really full. You'll at least be like on track. If somebody is dealing with mental health, again, you got to take that next step, work with an expert like yourself, be tracking things, but that can at least get you started as far as like what is a meal like this look like? And you'll look and you'll see some delicious looking meals. It's a great resource that I think
Yeah.
anybody could benefit from. And I just, you're the best at this. So I want to ask, with anybody's permission, maybe the people that you're gathering these interviews and stories with, since they will be published, do you have a case study or something that's standing out to you today that you'd like to share with us?
Oh, well, I can't really um when you write stuff up for peer review, you can't really share the story necessarily, but I'll tell you some of the diagnoses that I have that we're writing case studies up for, because I think that gives people hope to kind of know, oh, someone got well with that diagnosis. So I've got a case study of 2 remissions of psychotic symptoms and mood issues on ketogenic diets or schizoaffective disorder. That's in peer review right now. We have written up and are about to submit one major, lifelong, really major depressive disorder that went into remission literally in 2 months and was not individual consultation, was just on an online program, educational program. And we have another one that is remission of lifelong obsessive compulsive disorder. And we have an adult and a adolescent in that case series.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. I cannot wait for it. When this does get peer reviewed, will it come out to, for anybody to be able to access at some point?
Yes. So all your listeners, a lot of people doesn't know this exists, but if you Google Scholar, Google Scholar is actually a pretty good way to access these case studies and these studies coming out. You can literally put a cool little alert that just says ketogenic diet, and they will put in your inbox for you. You don't even have to go looking for it after that. They'll just send them to you, and you can kind of keep up with the literature and kind of see these case studies that are being published. Like it's not just me publishing them, like Lori Calabrese has that beautiful one. And there's quite a few that we found in our scoping review. So yeah, check out Google Scholar and put in ketogenic diet and the diagnosis you're looking for, but also the symptoms of that diagnosis, because sometimes stuff gets published depressive symptoms, right? But they're not necessarily looking at a formal diagnosis. So snoop around there and see what you find, and see if some of that gives you hope or ideas or motivation, and just go from there.
Wow, that's fantastic. We'll even link that in the notes as well, so people can just click the link and go straight there. But that's really good advice. This has been another super fun conversation. I love chatting with you, and I love your optimism. Again, I think we can say we're not quite there yet, but we're continuing to move the ball forward, and it's getting somewhere, and people are getting help. And again, if you're listening to this and thinking like, boy, I really wish I had that study, I hope you listen to the stories and pull those things up, those case studies, so that you can read for yourself and see the people that you and I get to interact with all the time that are experiencing healing and would never go back, not for one day in their life would go back to the suffering that they have experienced before. So it's always great to catch up. Nicole, where would you like people to go to find you and connect with you and your work?
Mentalhealthketo.com. There's a contact form, goes straight to my inbox. I'm happy to visit with you and help you find resources.
Gotcha. And then the social media is kind of hit and miss for you these days. You'll go on it for a while and then you'll be
I'm
off.
very busy.
You are
I'm very busy. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
I'm on Twitter. I'm still active on Twitter. I'm not doing my big threads right now. I'm busy writing other things. I'm on Instagram. I'm active. And that's pretty much the 2 main ones. Oh, LinkedIn. I'm also very active in LinkedIn because I do a training for psychotherapists on how to support people using ketogenic diets for mental illness. So I'm often talking about that work there.
Gotcha. Okay. And now that you are doing cooking classes virtually, are you going to pitch Netflix on a Cooking with Nicole kind of series? And no.
My cooking is very boring. Like I'm the mayonnaise sauce hamburger lady. It would be a very short show. It would not.
It sounds like my diet as well. I think it's great. That's awesome. Nicole, as always, thank you so very much for everything that you do. You're always so busy and doing such great work. So thank you for taking so much time out of your busy life to chat with us again today. We really, really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. I'll come anytime you invite me.
It's always an honor to have you. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.